In the old days, our elders used to stand in the middle. When you get older, your voice ain't as strong. So we have to use modern technology, white man's invention, the microphone. But for me, it was a pleasure to be asked to come here to Canada. And I'm very interested in languages because I've been to quite a few. I was at one in 2002 where they came in from New Zealand and Australia. It was language test, and they were learning their language. And even as us, as First Nations, as Indigenous people across Canada, United States, we are losing our languages because every time we lose an elder that's a fluent speaker, there's another person that's lost. But now we're trying to teach our young ones, and it's nice to hear the young ones start speaking. When I was growing up, in my community of Ganawaga, just south of here, you could walk down the street in the summertime and people were sitting on the porch, and you could stop and talk with them, tell stories. Today, they drive in cars, they just wait. They don't stop. You sit on the porch, nobody stops to come in to talk the language. Because we as elders, we are supposed to give guidance and direction. I sit on my porch and I only guide myself and give my own self-direction. And sometimes we start to forget things because we don't share it. And too many times, elders, they pass on to the spirit world, they take everything with them. For me, what I do is I leave it here. I share whatever I've learned. What am I going to do with it after I pass away and it's gone? I'm going to learn whatever like the elder says, it's like what's coming up, Christmas time. It's all through your lifetime. You're gathering gifts. Then you carry it over your shoulder. And then when your time is up, you turn around, you look around, then people are like grass in the wind. Then you start sharing all your gifts. You open up your bag in here. You can use it, but please don't forget who you are and your language. But in other ways, it's because of the residential schools, Indian day schools, we've all been punished to speak our languages. For me, that's what I went through in Indian day school. I think a lot of us, and I never lost the language. They even put soap in my mouth for speaking my language at a water pump, but they never broke my spirit. Do I condemn it? No. I think they helped me. 30 years, and I started to get more stronger in my language, my culture, my dances, my ceremonies. But they didn't succeed. I'm not only just one, but there's quite a few. But there's a lot in that today when we say, I have a training as a diabetes working educator. I did a workshop in our hospital with some of the patients in Ganawaga, and I was started speaking Mohawk, and I was only going to, some of them started to cry. They blocked their ears. So I stopped. I said, what's wrong? Did I say something wrong? Was I rude? They said, no. We don't understand what you're talking about. I said, okay. And these were older ones. They were in their 60s. Then I realized, wait a minute, I had to change the whole thing around. Even though they were in the 60s, I had to talk to them like they were young children. They would understand what I was talking about. And it was hard. I had to learn on my own in how to translate from English into my language of Kanyakahaga, and to make sure that I did not miss anything that was translations. So that we don't want to be rude to anybody. We don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But in our language, it's very hard to translate it from our language into English. So I always have to be careful how I talk. But I've learned, I traveled across Canada for about 15 years, and I've learned many nations that are out there, indigenous people that don't speak the language. Some of them, there's only one that's last week, but some of them don't have any. They're trying to relearn, and it's a struggle. If you're not growing up with it and you lose it, like when I was younger, I was able to speak French fluent because I didn't use it again. I lost it. So understand it, maybe one or two words here and there. And I never apologize for not speaking French. It's our first language here. It's our language. Kanyakahaga or Mohawk. And we are of the Kanyakahaga Nation. People of the Flint, better known as Mohawks. And there's a lot of controversy on the name Mohawks. But I won't talk about it here today. Maybe another time and for somebody else will talk about it. But for me, it's an honor to be here. Hopefully it'll succeed in what you are working on. I don't know how many First Nations or Indigenous languages are all over the world. But I know there's quite a few here, at least in Canada. When I traveled, I never knew that there were 623 First Nations and 633 communities. I had to learn that, getting involved in health and social services. And I met many elders across Canada. What users are up to, that's exactly what we talked about. How do we raise up the language of it? For me, I had a hard time because when I sat with governments, they spent millions and millions of dollars to re-educate our young children. Whereas at my time, they were taking the language away from us. I said, you are a bunch of hypocrites, government. And you almost destroyed us. For what? Our people helped you, your people with your land in here. What did you do to us? You tried to destroy us. I think we're going to be here forever. You're not going to be gone, we're still going to be. These are our lands, these are our territories. So we ain't moving and we ain't leaving. They always say the other people, as long as one person speaks it, then we're okay. But there are times there's going to come a time where they say there's going to be crime in our communities, that the governments are going to come in and start speaking our languages, asking us who we are and what we are. If you don't know how to speak your language, there's your process. It's already, you come with me. You stay. We finally convinced you. We finally succeeded in getting you into the mainstream society. We've been fighting this since 1869 when they came out with the white paper. Right now, it's still in operation. First Nations can say no, it shall no. I used to be friends with Mr. John Quincan when he was Prime Minister. He said it's on the agenda of every government that gets into power is to try to push that 69 white paper on us. And that's their number one agenda. Until they can find somebody that can do it, that can push it. And until that time, we all have to live in a constant fear of that one day it's going to happen. A lot of history. And there's not enough time in the day to talk about it. I'm not here to say it. But again, I'm just going to say a few words in my language to open up this meeting. Pwede ito ko ng harada tiniluwa din ako sa mga pet na other galing mga truly. Pwede ito na kwaya wire din ang one is quiet is. Pero sa stocks, agani ko rin ang lahat din ito. Sa rade. Kano din yung deriwa kami. And then yun, and then it is no harada din inista ako sa yun ang yung deris sa. Yun ang gananake yung sudar din ako da. Iko yung tajis. Sometimes I go down to the Gari was calling Muzade, he got away. And they get the Jamanad and then the Water got up on other to the Samadi. So started the hundred on that, so Tariha, and I know you got it, the Satan and how the other day I did. I was a way go you got. And then, and then if you start to talk like it, no need that it goes Sarajes. On the other end of the you go Sarajes. How much you know those in here, how the Yotajas was so this. How much you know those in here, I think Sango that in Nagares. And you came to go as one of the thing I go out in was so this. You will get to what gets to what I said, the whole you were delivering. And then you and I waited in the order when they got slower. And I waited in order that they now get it. You know, by the guy. So on the tender on by what doctor said, he was sorry to us. He was away. And then you and I waited to us. We got slower in order than what your head was. And the one that's soon yet, and what they are, and what they are telling you. You want to solve them. And then you know, I waited to go within the room, be room next. That you know, we're okay to the enough. But the why is of the what on the in the order that you know. And I wait in the order that you know, you know, you will. And then you know, that's not the one because then you keep the more that they wear us. And then you know why the one sort of so. Now they are way out is alone is not even starting. Other than now, they just kind of want to do it. I don't know, around the end of the it's hard. So just that they can know that the hour over us on in the whole that way for over hundreds. And then you know, and I go just put on a white the way in the one is why it is next night the water, Yaw. He says quite in order to such and hold on that what else the was going to God the what I want. Again, I thank all of you for being here. I know a lot of you are busy. For me, it's always an honor to do because I have a lot of interest in languages. And I try to learn all the different languages, indigenous languages. But it's kind of hard because you're only with the people for a meeting like this. And then I come home and maybe I'll pick up one or two words here, but by the time I get home, they forget. But I learned a lot. And I thank all of you for what your intentions are going to be. I know it's going to be a tough journey, but I think you are going to succeed. You always have somebody elders that can speak up and speak, but a lot of elders have a hard time. For me, no, because everything that I've seen, it's my grandchildren, they and our grandchildren, they both speak the language, but they were brought up with the language. I always told them never to forget, and always be proud of who you are, and never let nobody intimidate you. That even when you go to school, no. This is our territory. This is our language. The settlers that landed here, what did they bring with them? Nothing. You didn't even have dirt under their nails to share. But there's a lot of history, and I'm not here to take up all your time. But again, I gave lots of give thanks to all of this, everything. It's from the sky world to the water. And we give thanks to everything, even the plants, the gardens, the food, the wild game that's out there, four-legged animals, the birds, even how would you say, the insects that they have a little food. And we all have to give thanks to the nature, give thanks to the trees. And back in 1998, nobody ever knew that was going to happen, that the trees were going to die from the top. And the trees are still trying to recover from the ice storm of 1998. And then the windstorm of last week. I was asked, was there anything worse than that? They said, yes, back in 2002. That train almost flew off the train bridge over the St. Lawrence River. And they forgot about that. Hopefully it doesn't happen again. Again, then the flooding that's happening. My mentors, before they passed on about 20 years ago, they said you're going to see a lot of things changing. They said you're going to be surprising what you're going to see. And then they were just started to see it. you get older, you're going to start to see more. That's what I pay attention to what's happening out there. You know, even like food security right now. That's a big issue. I'm so involved with food security. How do we feed the world? How do we feed the people with everything that's happening all over the world? The earthquakes and tornadoes and everything else that's happening, volcanoes, hurricanes and typhoons. And even like last year when it snowed in Hawaii, excuse me, that's a big change in the world. And for them to see snow in Hawaii, that was big news for a while. But I never forgot what I experienced and what I've seen. And I was happy to share that. But in our language, we try to give thanks to all that the Creator has given to us. For us, never to be short of anything. Always to be mindful of your language. Where you are from, whatever nationality you are. A lot of you still speak your languages. Never forget that. That's what's going to see you through. Even us as native people, and we have to teach the young ones in how to do the ceremonies, make sure that we do the ceremonies for everything that we see. Even like our brother son, we have to give thanks to him that he shows his face every day and he wakes us up to see a new day. And at night, our grandmother will, and we survive the day with nothing happening to us. And the cycle every day is always the same thing. Then we give thanks for everything that we see, the wind, for direction. My grandfather thunders. My grandson told me that it's like you ever heard a drum? They gather all of the forces of nature, start to move forward with the wind, thunder, lightning. Sometimes it causes a lot of damage, but that's a law of nature. Can't change that. If we don't have that, we wouldn't be here. If we don't have fresh water, we won't survive. We always give thanks every time we take a drink of water. Give thanks to the water. That they still do their duties, even though the waters are sick. There's 2% of mercury in all the waters across the world. 2% doesn't sound like much, but when it gets into the food chain, makes a big difference. Maybe that's why people are so sick nowadays with all kinds of diseases. For us, that's the way we look at it. That's the way I was taught, and that's the way I look at it. The way of seeing the world and what I talk about. Not preaching, just to remind us that we have to take care of ourselves. We as human beings will destroy ourselves. We end up making one life. But again, ang gaya one of our others was funny when they go I thank you all for lending me your ears for a few moments. Now I give your ears back to you. I can listen and pay attention to what's happening, what's going on. And I'm here to listen to what all of you have to say. And you're going to be my teacher. Whatever I learn from you, I'll use it at another time or another thing. And I would like to thank Kevin for inviting me to come here. And I'm going to enjoy myself. And I would like to thank the gentleman there. I forget his name already. So what I do is I recognize faces. Faces I never forget. Names that and I hope that by the time I leave here, that a lot of these we're going to make friends. Something that I can always carry with me, that I was here and I was part of this, and then I'll pay attention to Kenneth to see what's happening on your journey, even all of us in our journeys, to see how everything unfolds. Again, Yawakoa, thank you very much and have a very good day. Ciao.
Thank you very much, Chief. Welcome everyone to this symposium on indigenous languages. You know that 2019 is the United Nations Year of Indigenous Languages. So we're proud to host. Proud to host this meeting today. You know that there are about 7,000 languages in the world. Only 600, about 600, have the written system. All the rest of them are only oral. And out of these 7,000 languages, about 2,000 are spoken in Canada. And out of these 2,200 spoken in Canada, more than 70 are indigenous languages. So we're proud to host this symposium here. We're honored to have the Vice President of FIT, who is hiding in the room back there, to make sure that everything is technically speaking. It's Alan Melby. You're going to meet him today. We also have Bill Rivers, who is the Vice President of FIT now North America, and also the official representative of FIT Mundo here today. I see you here, Bill. And at the back of the room, we have also Réal Paquet, who is the Secretary General of FIT and the former President of OTEC. So welcome, everybody. So about 70 more than 70 native languages are spoken in Canada. And I hope I'm not stealing anything from your presentation, Mrs. Silgan. Just one anecdote from my time at the Bureau. The Canada Census, which is done every 5 years, is translated in more than 65 languages every time. And most of them are indigenous languages. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Lucie Séguin, the CEO of the Translation Bureau, who's going to talk about the challenges and the opportunities that the new Indigenous Languages Act that Canada adopted this year is going to create for the Translation Bureau. Lucie Séguin.
Well, thank you very much. Ça me fait plaisir. Merci, Lucie Séguin. And I really appreciate the Chief's comments. Ma langue maternelle est le français. Donc, je choisis de dire bonjour en français. Par contre, first and foremost, and in the spirit of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, let's acknowledge that the land upon which we gather here today is an unceded Indigenous traditional territory. And I would sincerely like to thank the Mohawk Nation for its hospitality and its great chief. So thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Monsieur Denata for inviting me here today. It is a privilege for the Translation Bureau, which is within the Government of Canada, to be part of this really important meeting. So I have a clicker somewhere that I probably forgot. Yes, thank you. Here we go. Excellent. Thank you very much. So again, really pleased to be here. I will be talking about the Translation Bureau today with a short overview of what we do at the Bureau, the services we deliver to the Government of Canada, as well as to both houses of Parliament in Canada. We will be talking a lot about Indigenous languages, the opportunities that Mr. Barabé has said, but also some of the challenges that we're facing, many of which were raised by Chief before in the introductory remarks. I'll speak about some historic milestones and some of the next steps that we're undertaking in the area of Indigenous languages. I will be presenting mainly in English today as I was asked to do so, but if you have any questions in French or in any other language, please ask them. I'm not sure if I can be very proficient outside of English and French, but I'm happy to accept a question in any language. So at the Translation Bureau, we were created in 1934. So we've been providing services to the Government of Canada for 85 years already. And essentially we are the entity within the Government of Canada which provides translation, terminology, and interpretation services to all government departments and agencies, as well as the Senate and the House of Commons and Parliament. We have developed a vision to make sure that we always keep on the objective of delivering high quality services in all languages that we provide. But we have positioned in the center of our vision our employees and as well our clients. So really important a priority for me and for the Translation Bureau is to enhance our employees' well-being. So making sure that we provide a safe and healthy work environment, really important, in particular with the advent of all of these technological changes that are happening. It's really important to ensure that our employees are always healthy and protected. We're also providing training to properly equip our employees, our language experts, as well as all the support staff to make sure that everyone is well equipped to be able to perform and deliver high quality services for our clients. And this is also with the objective of remaining a leading edge organization. Another key pillar of the vision is to always work on the quality of the services. What underpins the vision are a number of legislations. We are celebrating this year the 50th anniversary of the Official Languages Act. So as well as we must respect the Translation Bureau Act, which our organization was built upon. So improving quality is really a priority. And for us, quality means respecting all of the language policies in Canada. We will speak about Indigenous languages, and Mr. Barabe referred to the new act that was enacted in June. I will speak to that. So we're talking about a brand new act representing a whole new set of challenges for us at the Translation Bureau. A really key aspect of the vision as well is strengthening our relationship with stakeholders. So collaboration for the Translation Bureau is very key. We are one of the many important stakeholders in the ecosystem in Canada. So we have and maintain collaborations and relationships with a wide range of stakeholders, including most recently we are developing our relationships and building trust with our colleagues in the Indigenous communities, and I'll speak more about that shortly. The Government of Canada and the Translation Bureau is one of the largest language organizations in Canada. We employ the largest number of translators, interpreters, and terminologists in Canada, and we rank 12th in the world. So the Translation Bureau is looked at as a leader in Canada, but also globally in the delivery of linguistic services. Collaboration being at the heart of our vision, we've created in August of this year an industry advisory committee that is going to be discussing the impact of neural machine translation and the impact of artificial intelligence on the sector in Canada, and also globally. We support the industry, the language sector in Canada, very actively. In fact, 40% of everything that is translated at the Bureau is done by our private sector freelance translators as well as interpreters. And we're also pleased to work collaboratively with associations, including OSIAC, on many fronts, including the mentorship program, which I saw in the pamphlet. So we collaborate with associations, professional associations, universities across Canada, and I'll speak about what we're doing in particular to develop capacity to deliver services in the many Indigenous languages that exist in Canada. We also need to make sure that we keep our clients happy and pleased. Clients are always asking for faster, cheaper, better services. In the advent of technology and the turnaround times that are requested are always very short. And another act which was recently implemented, C-58, this is the amendment of the Access to Information Act in Canada, which basically obliges government departments to release simultaneously in both official languages a broad range of documents that are produced, including transition documents, documents that provide advice to our ministers and deputy ministers. And we're seeing an increase in the volume of words to translate. We've seen the impact immediately as soon as the act was put into service. And also the fact that the Translation Bureau is a cost recovery organization for the most part. Clients are always turning to the Bureau to deliver cheaper services, so the most cost-effective services in a very tight turnaround time, but also always requesting high quality. And for us, quality means, it's a key pillar of our vision, ensuring that we meet or even exceed the Official Languages Act requirements. So we've been investing a lot of time in quality. We have appointed a Chief Quality Officer at the Translation Bureau. The first phase of the work that she undertook was to develop a quality framework for translations, and that was completed last year. We have appointed a new Chief Quality Officer, Justine Brett. She is an interpreter by trade, so we are developing the second phase of our quality framework, which is developing a framework to assess quality of interpretation services. So that, I think, is giving you a little bit of an idea of where we're heading. Overview quickly, the Translation Bureau employs at the current 1,154 employees. Many of our employees are located across Canada. We have a very high percentage of our employees, 400, that work remotely from home or in satellite offices across Canada. And we also have a number of our employees, translators, that work on site with our Government of Canada partners, clients, including the Department of National Defence, Transport Canada, the Privy Council Office, for example. We basically, although we are an optional service, the Translation Bureau takes care of about 70% of the entire volume of Government of Canada translations. And that's growing. We're seeing a trend growth. Some clients that used to go to the private sector directly are coming back to the Translation Bureau, and we basically, again, outsource a high percentage of our work to the private sector. 325 million words translated for departments and agencies, 50 million words translated for Parliament, both House of Commons and Senate. As you see, a lot of hours of conference interpretation. We also provide closed captioning services for people with perceptual disabilities and sign language. We offer American Sign Language as well as the Langage des Signes Québec, and as well as transliteration. We offer interpretation services and translation services in all foreign languages when requested, as well as in Indigenous languages. And I'll get to more of the specifics about about Indigenous languages. And finally, we have a product or a program called the Language Portal of Canada, which provides free resources online to Canadians. I encourage all of you, if you have not been on the Language Portal, to consult it. It's free. And we are adding content, Indigenous languages content, more and more. So there would be resources in there that may be of interest to you. And Termium Plus is the key, or crown jewel, I would say, the most popular terminological engine or tool in the world. It is consulted 3 million times per month. And what is really interesting is that we have users scattered around the globe, 200 countries, over approximately 220 countries, citizens of countries consult our termium application every month. So a range of services which I have mentioned, translation, interpretation, we support accessibility through closed captioning and sign language. And, but I'll go right now to the context of the reason why we are here today. Mr. Barabé spoke about this year, United Nations marking 2019 as the International Year of Indigenous Languages. And we also heard the respected chief speak about reconciliation efforts that the government of Canada has undertaken. It is a key priority of the government, has been since 2015. So the Translation Bureau collaborates with other Government of Canada departments that are participating in the reconciliation efforts, including the Department of Canadian Heritage, Indigenous Services Canada, and Crown Indigenous Relations Canada. Some of you may be aware, but I wanted to mention that since November 2018, there was a decision by the Standing Committee on Procedures and House Affairs in the Parliament of Canada to allow parliamentarians, so representatives in Canada in Parliament, to address Parliament in the Indigenous language of their choice. So that was a decision that was made, report number 66. So as of November 2018, we have had to provide services when an MP or parliamentarian has asked for this service. And I'll give you some statistics on how often that has happened. And finally, the act that was put into place in June, received a royal assent in June, this past June, very recently. Bill C-91, that's the kind of the code that we use in the government, but it is a legislation to support the meaningful implementation of calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So the Act recognizes Indigenous language rights, really important and fundamental. It also supports the efforts of Indigenous peoples to reclaim, revitalize, strengthen, and maintain Indigenous languages in their communities. It also supports and promotes the use of Indigenous languages. So the Translation Bureau is very actively involved in many aspects to support the new Indigenous Languages Act. Some examples, and just a little bit of a recent history. You may recall that Robert Falcon-Ouellet was the first to make a speech in his language, Cree, in the House of Commons. Mr. Falcon-Ouellet is from Winnipeg Centre. So that basically was very symbolic. So we were there. You see here on a picture a photo of the Indigenous languages interpreters that we have gathered for a few workshops to start getting them acquainted with the realities of interpreting in Parliament, which is very intimidating, and it's quite an experience for any person. But it's also in particular when you have to speak in your native language. So we're offering workshops right now to help build capacity and get people familiar with the experience of providing the service. So in February 19th, we provided services for the first time in Oneida Sign Language. So we're combining Indigenous languages, but also sign language. So those things combined are really breaking a lot of new ground for us, and there's a lot of risks, a lot of opportunities though. We also provide interpretation and translation services. We have done so in 4 languages for 6 sittings of the House of Commons. For twice, we provided Prairies Cree, 1 time in Dene, 1 time in East Cree, and twice in Mohawk. So that was our experience from January to June 2019. And you may have seen or heard, I hope, on October 7th and 10th, for the first time in history, the federal leaders' debates in the context of the Canadian elections provided for the first time, interpretation into 5 Indigenous languages. So we, the Translation Bureau, with the help of Indigenous languages interpreters, provided English interpretations into Plains Cree, Inuktitut, and Ojibwe, and from French to East Cree and Dene. So these people that you see on the slide, we're really, really thankful for them, because this is the team of interpreters that came from across Canada to provide to facilitate the interpretation of the federal leaders' debates. So a lot of work is going into building our relationships, building trust with the Indigenous communities across Canada, to allow Indigenous peoples then to come to Parliament and be able to provide to their communities a sense and information on what is happening in this democratic process in Canada in the language that they understand. So in terms of numbers, we have at the Translation Bureau been providing Indigenous services or language services for a number of years, but in a very small scale. So what's happened with the new Indigenous Languages Act, the committee decision to provide parliamentarians with an ability to speak to Parliament in the Indigenous language of their choice, is that it's kind of booming now. So in terms of translations, you can see on the slide that in 2018-19 and what we have seen this year to date, we're exceeding 1,200 requests for translations in Indigenous languages. And that boils down to 900,000 words in last year, and we're already at close to 380,000 words this year. And this is only for 5 months before parliamentary basically resumed and gave way to the electoral period. So the key translation requests that we have, the top Indigenous languages or the most frequently requested are Inuktitut, Inuit, Naktun, but we also have as a third highest volume Mohawk, Algonquin, Ojibwe, Dene, and Plains Cree. So in terms of interpretation, we have had to date, so from June to September, 3 requests in 3 different Indigenous languages, Plains Cree, Inuktitut, and Mohawk. And as Dana Darabe mentioned, there are over 70 Indigenous languages in Canada, grouped within 11 families. But what we've found, and what also the chief has mentioned very pertinently, is that it is really hard to find people, one, that can speak the language, and secondly, that have the ability or the interest to come and interpret and provide the service in Ottawa. So that represents a lot of challenges for us. Just another anecdote as well, the Translation Bureau supports the publication of the Canadian Food Guide in 9 Indigenous languages. So that ensures that or the public health information, the Department of Health Canada can provide the information in English, French, but as well in Plains Cree, Dene, Inuktitut, Baffin Island, Inuktitut. We also provide Nunatsiavut, Inuktitut, Nunavik, Inuktitut, Michif, Ojibwe, and Ojibwe. We've undertaken a number of partnerships, and we have regular discussions with the Modern Treaty Office of Crown Aboriginal Relations at Northern Affairs Canada, which basically have collaborations with 97 Indigenous communities through their 25 treaties. So what we have done is that we basically provide information on to all of the communities on what is required to become a translator or an interpreter in an Indigenous languages. And we provide and support in the people that are interested with the steps to become an Indigenous language provider. We were recently at the Rendezvous de l'Interprétation in Montreal in August. And so we've participated in discussions with the Indigenous languages communities to learn about practices and challenges for to become an interpreter or a translator. And the objective is really to build bridges between communities and also build trust so that we can identify people that are interested in helping provide the service. We have organized, and I hope that this is on your radar and it's open to all, but the Pan-Canadian Terminology Committee will be held November 14th in Gatineau in the Ottawa region. The conference will focus on terminology in the Indigenous languages, and it invites experts from across Canada to discuss terminological and linguistic issues related to English, French, and various Indigenous languages. This meeting is open to all. It is free. So if you are interested in attending, I will provide the information to OTSIAC or to the organizers so that you all can see if you can make it, and it would be great to see you there. In terms of building capacity, which is a big issue, as Dana Barabi mentioned, there are many languages, Indigenous languages, where they are mostly oral, they are not codified, versus English, French, and other European languages that have been well documented for hundreds of years. So we're really starting at the infancy stage of creating just an understanding of what this means. So what we have been doing, some of the services that we provide, transcription, translation, and interpretation services to Parliament and federal departments. So I have mentioned that. We also collaborate with partners to identify Indigenous languages needs. For example, we have reviewed the list of MPs that were recently elected as a result of the election in Canada, and there are currently 7 federal MPs that come from Indigenous backgrounds. So we're getting ready, and 7 different Indigenous languages. So we're getting ready, and we're looking at the cabinet making process. The Prime Minister is set to announce the new cabinet for Canada on November 20th. So the Translation Bureau will be looking closely at which ministers get elected, what is their linguistic preference, English, French, as well as would there be any ministers that would be interested in addressing Parliament in an Indigenous language. So we're getting ready in advance, and we will be doing the same. We are doing the same thing with senators. We have a number of Indigenous background senators in Parliament, and we are meeting one-on-one to discuss their needs, their interests, so that we can then be ready in the event that the senators or the ministers would like to address Parliament in their language. We have also hired and assigned an outreach leader, a member of an Indigenous community, part of our group full-time. She is fantastic, and her main job is to basically bridge gaps, build trust, and basically understand the community, reach out to the community. And being an Indigenous person herself lends a lot of respect and credibility to the effort that we are trying to do. Her name is Diane Gauthier. Some of you may know her. She's fantastic. And so we're working really to build bridges, to understand the needs, not only from the clients, but understand the needs of Indigenous communities and also the level of capacity of being able to then provide a service. And awareness, we have built a lot, and we're building. We're at the infancy stage again. Workshops, for example, for the federal leaders debates, we invited 15 Indigenous language keepers and language interpreters to a workshop with experienced interpreters of the Translation Bureau to do some training, the trainer kind of capacity workshops, so that they also get familiar with the environment and the role that they would be asked to play. So, and that would basically, we're learning a lot at the Translation Bureau and teaching ourselves on the culture and all of the cultural implications of dealing with Indigenous, members of Indigenous communities. We have made a few faux pas and we're learning every day because of our cultural backgrounds. There are so many things we have yet to understand. So I have a lot of respect, and I was really pleased to listen to the chief and the elders, because we have so much to learn about how to engage and develop respectful relationships. So that leads me to our challenges. Limited resources. You can just understand by virtue of the number of languages to cover and the limited capacity. Our biggest issue is limited resources and capacity. We also have to work with a client, let's say Parliament, who basically decides we need interpretation in X number of Indigenous languages in 2 days. Well, that's just not possible for so many reasons. First of all, Indigenous languages service providers are not interpreters, full-time interpreters. That does not exist. They are members of communities, often remote, that are far away from Ottawa. Oftentimes when we come from Ottawa, we think everything revolves around Ottawa. Well, people have to travel and get to Ottawa. We've had some instances where we have identified approximately 90 different Indigenous service providers, but we may have 1 or 2, if we're lucky, in each of the about 20. We can cover right now a range of 20 Indigenous languages, but if the one interpreter that can interpret in Cree, Plains Cree, is otherwise occupied with legitimate activities like hunting and fishing, it is impossible for us to get that person into Ottawa to interpret. So there's a lot of building the awareness, and also feeding federal government apparatus with the realities of dealing and having to respect Indigenous cultures and the way of life of Indigenous peoples. So there's a lot of things that we have to still learn, and also sometimes we are forced to say that we cannot provide the service. So we're trying to build understanding around that, in particular for elected officials, explaining to them that if we need heads up, that's why we're doing all of our pre-meetings, because it may be sometimes impossible to find, locate, and a person that will be able to deliver the service. This is not unique to Canada. I've been speaking to colleagues in the USA, in Europe, in New Zealand, in Australia. Capacity in Indigenous languages is very scarce, and this is one of the main reasons for the Indigenous Languages Act, because we need to rebuild capacity, revitalize, and teach the young people these languages so that they can then be able to more easily provide the services. There's been an increase in demand, so you'll see we're reaching out right now. It's not a surprise, and I gave you numbers. We're changing the way we deliver services to meet the demands, as I mentioned. Normally, an interpreter that provides services to Parliament would require a master's degree. Obviously, it is not a reality that we can apply for Indigenous languages communities. First of all, the pool of people that can speak is so limited, and also, again, there are no degrees in the Canadian system right now to provide a master's in Indigenous interpretation or translation. So we're working in collaboration with a number of colleges that teach Indigenous languages, universities, community schools as well, to try to build that capacity. It is most important as well to be respectful of our role. We can train on the way to provide interpretation and translation services, but what we're looking to create is a system where Indigenous peoples train and teach other Indigenous peoples on how to translate and interpret, so that we would be just providing some support in that respect. Infancy stage again. We also have to adapt our processes. We have in a number of Indigenous languages interpreters and translators that do not have bank accounts. So how do you remunerate? Contractual rules as well. Some of our interpreters do not have things like passports and methods to identify themselves as a Canadian citizen. So we've had to find flexibility in a number of our very rigid Government of Canada financial procedures. So we're working really hard, and I apologize because it seems so hard to do business with the government of Canada if you're a member of an Indigenous community. So we have to find ways to be flexible. We want to respect, of course, public stewardship of funds and all those good things, but we also need to make it easier for us to work together if we want to truly increase our capacity. There's also the issue of official languages, as the chief said very accurately. It usually we require that our interpreters speak English and French at all times. Well, in this case, it's not. We have to be flexible because many Indigenous peoples, well, their first language is not English or French, so we have to respect that. And finally, just a little quirky thing, interpreting in Indigenous languages in Parliament requires a third box to put an individual in. Right now, traditionally, we've only interpreted in 2 languages, so you may be aware that we're renovating the parliamentary precincts in Ottawa. All of the new facilities will have 3 booths. So it will be an addition of French and English as well as the other language, because we also have been asked to provide services in foreign languages for different debates. So we're looking at as well to make sure that we have a space that is adequate, that is not too confined. So there are a bunch of different considerations. So in terms of our next steps, we're continuing to build the capacity through building networks and partnerships, because if we can access a larger pool of a larger number of communities who wish to offer linguistic services. We've found some of the Indigenous language providers that helped us with the debates. I'll show you their picture again. We're really, really proud to come and to be able to provide the information about the debates in their language. The debates were broadcast on CPAC and a number of other Indigenous languages channels in Canada, and radio as well. So it was really, we saw the pride that the individuals had to be able to transmit the information in the Indigenous language of their choice. So we're looking at basically working with the group that we have and building that out so that we basically can attract and promote our opportunities to more people. We're going to continue to build workshops to build awareness, get people familiar with the environment. And we're also doing a study on availability of it and capacity to define where we have capacity and where we have gaps, particularly when looking at the parliamentarians and basically what their needs are. The new bill, the Indigenous Languages Act, broadens possibly the responsibility of the Government of Canada. It is not impossible that in the future, the Government of Canada would have to provide Indigenous languages services to all citizens in Canada. So that is really different. Right now, we are having challenges meeting the needs of the Parliament. So it would be really a different challenge if we had to provide Indigenous languages services to all citizens across Canada for all services of Canada. So you can think of passport information, Parks Canada information, Canada revenue forms in Indigenous languages, anything that we Basic Service Canada offerings. So we're keeping an eye on that, but certainly there is lots to do, and we're starting, but it's going well. To date, we've learned so much by working with Indigenous communities. It's brought for me just so much personal growth and understanding and appreciation and respect and humbleness as well. So this is where we are. I hope this was interesting to you. It's an opportunity for sure, but I do not want to minimize the issues. It's challenging, but we're doing our best. And we can only achieve it by building trust and with Indigenous communities and peoples across Canada. Thank you for the invitation. Sure.
Any questions?
So
My name is Catherine Allen. I come from the United States, and I have some experience working with helping to provide interpreting training for Indigenous interpreters in healthcare and community settings.
Yes.
So I know that one of the biggest challenge is actually the proficiency and growing a language that didn't evolve in the modern community, and how do you say all of those terms? So what I'm really curious about is, how are you working to build that language capacity for all of the legal and diplomatic and international terminology that they're having to transfer simultaneously?
Yes.
So I'm just that's what I'd like to know, is what are you doing to bridge that gap?
Thank you. Very important. It's one of our biggest issues. So I'll use the example of the federal leaders debate. The Translation Bureau is the Canada's authority for terminological expertise. So basically, the terminologists at the Translation Bureau were key when we were preparing for the debates to basically arrive at a consensus on one of the terms. Concretely, was how do we write Ojibwe? What's the appropriate writing? So we had our terminological experts. We have a network, pan-Canadian, but also international networks, to basically very rapidly come to an agreement on how we would define just a simple spelling for one language. So I think that is evolving. This is one of the key reasons that we're having our pan-Canadian terminology conference on November 14th, especially on Indigenous languages. This is where we want to start bringing international and national experts together to develop the capacity terminology for many languages that have no codified place in that are not codified. It's the beginning. If the United States has started to work on that, we'd be pleased to collaborate. Okay, that would be great, because we have in our terminological banks right now some terminology on Inuktitut, for instance. We have a partnership, a collaboration with the government of Nunavut, where we're co-developing terminology. And we also work with the l'Office québécois de la langue française here in the province of Quebec to ensure that we are not duplicating. So we're basically dividing and conquering. So each of the entities, so it would be interesting in the US, but in other jurisdictions, if we could have there's so much to do, if we can avoid overlap, that would be great, because we can each benefit from each other's terminology as it develops. But it's a huge challenge. Thank you. Okay. Yes.
I wonder, we're very far linguistically, but I wonder if a country such as Israel could be of interest, in the sense that they had to recreate, be it in one language, a whole vocabulary of every single possible technical field that did not exist, since these things were under the Bible. So if they've done it, they might, maybe they might have tricks that could apply to any language technically, not solve terminological issues, but solve methodological issues.
Yes.
Maybe. They might be interested too.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm noting this. Absolutely. Because I think that will be one of our key challenges. Finding a common way to describe. And of course, that's a great example.
They're working currently with the Kurds in Iraq, because the Kurds have the same issue. They were not naming in technological entities. Now they have decided that they want to.
Yes, very, very pertinent. So not so much on the terminology, but the methods to arrive at, or the standard setting kind of process. Thank you. I will follow up on that. That's a great suggestion.
I just have a few quick questions. First of all, can we get a copy of your presentation?
Absolutely.
I use it to share with everybody.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I also wanted to mention that you, just passing so that people understand that in the Indigenous languages that were interpreted in the House of Parliament, the person that spoke Mohawk wasn't a Mohawk, and the person wasn't even an Indigenous person, but a member of Parliament from Montreal who spoke Mohawk to translate, and that it was considered historic at the time. You know, it's a little embarrassing when you have the Canadian government, like myself, I don't speak Mohawk because of government policy, and now you have a member of Parliament speaking Mohawk in House of Commons and being celebrated for it. I find that a little ironic, but anyway. I just want to make that point. The other thing is your timeline about indigenous languages spoken in the House of Commons. I understand that there was a Cree that spoke in the early 90s, and also Romeo Saganash spoke Cree before 2018.
Yes, you're right, completely. This is very recent with Monsieur Falcon-Willett, but yes, Mr. Saganash spoke. This was not the first time Parliament was addressed. We'll correct that. I did not want to give that impression, but it was a very short history. It was Monsieur Falcon-Willett who kind of led there are many leaders to be recognized in this, and yeah, I take your point. We will add, so I'll share you can use my deck, but I can add those historical references if you find it useful. The first point that you made, I absolutely agree. We have members of Parliament that wish to express or address Parliament in an Indigenous language because they represent the people, but they may not be themselves from that community. So we would be open to having a dialogue with Indigenous communities to say what we don't want to, we want to avoid faux pas, like clearly. So how would that be perceived, and is that okay?
I'm not complaining that he spoke Mohawk. I think I admire his enthusiasm, and that it's his way of reconciliation.
Yeah.
And so it's not a complaint. It's just ironic.
It's ironic. I see your point. So yes, and that there's many aspects to that. Like when we are asked to provide a service, we provide it. But I am sensitive to the context, la conjoncture around it.
And the other thing is, I forgot to mention, is that we don't want the details on this November 14th meeting.
You would like, yes. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It would be like such a privilege to be able to have you.
It won't be me.
Or someone in your end, but have participation. We have University of Saskatchewan, Ottawa U, Radio-Canada, like all the entities that are responsible to get together in Canada to be able to provide better services. It's a start again, but yes, we will provide, I can give you my business card and I can provide the information to Jen and I. But it would be great. It's open and we have space, so thank you.
Je peux poser ma question en français?
Oui, absolument.
J'ai pas noté, mais certaines langues, certaines combinaisons de langues, les langues autochtones vont avec le français et d'autres avec l'anglais. Est-ce que vous avez pensé à faire une séparation entre les deux? Si c'est le cas, est-ce que vous avez réfléchi au problème de la langue relais? Est-ce qu'une des deux langues, l'anglais ou le français, va devenir la langue relais pour l'interprétation?
Oui, en fait, ce qu'on a, les combinaisons linguistiques pour le débat parlementaire étaient simplement basées sur la capacité de rendre le service. Il n'y a pas de raison autre que, puis en fait, pour le débat des chefs, pour la première fois, nous avions 2 interprètes pour chaque langue autochtone pour pouvoir faire une gestion de la qualité, plus ou moins. Donc, il n'y a pas de lien entre les... On n'est pas rendu là dans la réflexion, en fait. Puis ça, ce serait la politique de langue linguistique. À l'intérieur du gouvernement du Canada, c'est le ministère de patrimoine canadien qui se chargerait d'établir une politique de la langue suite à la loi sur les langues autochtones. So just to repeat for those of you who don't understand French, we basically identified the language combinations for the leaders' debate on October 7th and 10th based on availability and capacity simply. There is no, like I mentioned, we translated from English to 3 Indigenous languages, French to 2 Indigenous languages, purely based on who was available, which interpreter had which mastery of which language. There is no strategic or policy reason other than availability so we are not as mature yet. We are not at the point where we are basically positioning English, French, the official languages and the Indigenous languages and how they interact. I don't see that in the very short term, honestly.
Le troisième bout dans le House of Commons.
Oui.
Ça va être une langue autochtone vers l'anglais, j'imagine.
C'est toujours de l'anglais, c'est soit de français, une langue autochtone, anglais dans une langue autochtone. La troisième cabine, c'est pour l'interprète qui donne le service dans la langue autochtone de destination.
OK.
Ou bien une langue étrangère. On pourrait aussi, on a eu des débats récemment en italien, en mandarin, et donc on met c'est l'endroit où l'interprète mandarin. Puis là, il y a du relais, comme vous mentionnez, je pense que vous connaissez l'interprétation, mais on peut relayer, mais c'est très, très difficile dans les langues autochtones de passer du anglais, langue autochtone à français, ou vice-versa.
J'ai l'impression que c'est l'anglais qui peut servir de langue de relais entre les langues autochtones et le français.
Ça dépend de où. Présentement, on a une bonne capacité au Nunavik, dans le nord du Québec, où il y a beaucoup d'interprètes. Ça dépend de où la capacité va se développer. Je pense que généralement, je suis d'accord avec vous parce que principalement, la deuxième langue des personnes autochtones, c'est l'anglais. C'est leur première langue. C'est principalement ça, mais c'est difficile encore très tôt. Puis mon échantillon est tellement peu statistiquement valide que je voudrais pas induire personne en erreur.
Je voudrais savoir, c'est quoi l'effet que ça va avoir sur le bureau de la traduction, le fait que les titres, ça soit la langue officielle du Nunavut?
Donc, c'est un territoire, donc c'est un autre palier du gouvernement. Dans le fond, pour nous, c'est ce que nous, on n'a pas le mandat de fournir un service aux provinces ou aux territoires présentement. Par contre, les citoyens du Nunavut vont probablement avoir plus d'attentes, ce qui aura un effet ricochet possiblement sur les services que fournit le gouvernement fédéral. Présentement, la loi au niveau fédéral n'exige pas que les ministères au niveau fédéral fournissent les services en langues autochtones. Mais on travaille avec eux étroitement. De notre côté, on travaille stratégiquement avec le gouvernement du Nunavut pour améliorer la terminologie, faire des avancées parce qu'ils ont une capacité, étant donné qu'ils ont une nouvelle loi. Donc, il y a un intérêt là, pour en faire le plus qu'on peut, dans le fond. Mais c'est intéressant.
Est-ce qu'il serait envisageable de voir un apport langue autochtone dans le termium? Parce que je crois savoir qu'au termium, au fédéral, vous avez déjà pas mal de langues qui ne sont accessibles que pour l'espagnol à l'extérieur. Est-ce que ça risque de...
Espagnol, portugais, on en a peu.
Non, en France, on a disparu, le portugais, je ne le vois plus.
Il y a des tiroirs linguistiques qui sont disponibles au public, certains ne le sont pas. C'est un peu compliqué, là.
Et
on peut les rendre disponibles.
S'il y a des choses
on pourra s'en parler si vous en voulez. Mais on envisage d'augmenter, oui, les tiroirs terminologiques dans les langues autochtones. Mais présentement, le mandat et le financement aussi, c'est un autre enjeu. Le financement qu'on reçoit pour la terminologie qu'on fait au bureau de la traduction, c'est un crédit parlementaire. Puis on est mandaté de le faire en anglais et en français, principalement. Donc on le fait pour les autres langues. Par exemple, on a eu un petit montant d'argent du ministère de patrimoine canadien pour développer de la capacité en langues autochtones. Donc, on doit respecter au gouvernement fédéral, si on reçoit des fonds pour un certain objectif, on ne peut pas décider, nous, de changer de... Donc, c'est un peu complexe dans le sens qu'on peut pas vraiment... On a des dollars attribués pour certaines initiatives. On en a un peu pour les langues autochtones, mais c'est à venir, je crois. On fait ce qu'on peut avec ce qu'on a, dans le fond. Si on peut dire ça.
I'd like to know what's leading what. Is it training before you can actually provide the services, or are the services required and then you kind of find training for these people? How do you work training and offering the service at the same time? That's one question. And the other question is, translating and interpreting into the indigenous languages, is it about communication or is it about policy? What I'm asking is, did the people who followed the federal debates in indigenous languages, would they have not understood it, had not been interpreted? Or was it about communication, or was it about making a statement?
Thank you for that. I didn't catch your name.
I'm Gonzalo from Mexico.
Okay. Thank you. I always like these sessions because then I can tell you what I can tell you. The first one, ideally, in an ideal setting, we would train and then we to ensure that we have a capacity to deliver a service. what's been happening in Canada is like the inverse is happening. There were some decisions made to allow, for example, the Procedures Committee, the House of Commons decision to provide and our parliamentarians with the ability. That was done, a decision made within Parliament. That was by elected officials, so political. And then we had to, because our act, the enabling legislation that oversees the Translation Bureau, indicates that we shall provide the service when asked. So we basically had to scramble and find ways to offer the service. So it was the inverse. With the introduction of C91, the Indigenous Languages Act, what we're doing now is we're trying to build as much capacity as we can, because we're anticipating that there will be an increase in demand. Like that's happening because of the state of Indigenous languages globally. It's going to be very challenging for us to say we're fully ready and able to provide. And everyone that is involved in this endeavor will basically understand. The second question about policy or communication, perhaps I would ask a member of an Indigenous community. I can't answer if the people who basically listened to the broadcasts in Indigenous languages, if the service allowed them to understand, and if we had not provided the service, would they have understood? I can't answer that. We were asked to provide a service again, and because of the legislation that we must honor, we had to provide the service. The rationale behind the decision to provide the service was made by the the Leaders Debate Commission. It is a non-political entity that was created after the last elections to basically provide a non-biased, non-politically biased leaders debate. There's a lot of discussion and a lot of opinions about whether or not that was achieved. But the intent of the Leaders Debate Commission was to ensure to maximize access for Canadians. The broadcasts were done not only in the Indigenous languages, they were done in official languages, in I believe 7 foreign languages, the main languages, foreign languages spoken by Canadians, and the Translation Bureau also offered services in American Sign Language, le langage des signes du Québec, and all the closed captioning. I didn't mention that, but basically there were a number of, the objective was to broaden the reach.
You talked about 6 languages, 6 Indigenous languages, and some were interpreted from English and some other from French. And you said that it was about capabilities. The capabilities was to choose where they took the language, what language they took from English or from French, or was it also that the 6 languages were the 6 languages that you have capabilities of interpreting into?
It was the latter. Basically, we needed, for the leaders' debates, what we had done previously for any appearances in Parliament, we had one interpreter interpreting a member of Parliament, with no other individual able to determine if the validity, the accuracy, the quality of the interpretation. For the leaders' debate, we needed to have at least 2, so that they could, and it's not only for quality, but it's also, there's so many ways to describe words. As the elder mentioned, it's hard to translate into Indigenous language because it's not the same paradigm. We're like completely in a different world. So an interpreter may use, because of their upbringing in their locality, a certain word in English, and there's a lot of disagreement. There's not consensus. It's not very standardized. So we needed to, so essentially boil down to how many languages combinations can we have, where we have 2 willing participants that speak. So it had nothing to do with the most popular, the most spoken. We tried, but it's in the end it was really about who is able and willing to do it. So again, it sounds very non-scientific. It is very non-scientific. We're basically doing our best right now.
Yeah.
I think there's another hand. I'll take it.
I have a question about Indigenous interpreter training. You mentioned that you've been going into colleges where they have Indigenous language education programs. So my question is twofold. First of all, I'd like to know, how is that going? Have you made any headway with those colleges? And then the second part of the question is, have you considered going into interpreting schools instead, rather than Indigenous language schools, going into interpreting schools and subsidizing to allow Indigenous interpreters to study through those very limited programs that we have set up?
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the meetings with some colleges, we were at Sylvie, the college within Alberta that basically teaches Indigenous translation and interpreters. Our participation there was to provide experienced, seasoned translators, interpreters to help build the curriculum for the Indigenous languages programs that they develop. And it's sporadic and infrequent right now. It's not as systemized. We don't have a program or an initiative right now where we're at the Translation Bureau where we're doing it systematically and I'd say coherently. On your second question about
Interpreting schools.
Interpreting schools. So it's in our experience, what we're seeing is that the people that can speak the languages are not necessarily going to Glendon and Ottawa U, the two top colleges in Canada that teach interpretation, where we send our employees to basically teach. There's an issue in Canada in terms of capacity and interpretation en général, English, French, foreign languages. So even for the English-French issue, we have a capacity issue. I cannot train enough in Canada. We cannot train enough interpreters to meet the demands in English and French. And what we require and what our standards are very high for quality. Like, it is really tough to make it through our accreditation program, but it's tough for a reason, because we must deliver the highest quality services. And that's why we do our own accreditation process at the Translation Bureau, which I've always found a little bit odd, because when I came, I had worked in other industries, in other government departments, and it was very rare that the government had stepped in to provide the accreditation process. So I think that speaks to interpretation more globally. So if you look at interpretation in Indigenous languages, at this point, we're basically looking for people who can speak the language and are willing to transmit the language. We have not, maybe I haven't looked at the statistics, but I don't know, and I will ask Ashley, how many Indigenous peoples are registering for the Glendon type or Ottawa U type trainings? I would say
They would be registering for your community interpreting trainings in Canada, not Glendon.
that's right.
Although would not be impossible. I mean, we have 2 Glendon teachers here who are instructors for the program.
Cool.
So it would not be impossible, though, to create a model, because it has a language specific and language. The classes are split between language neutral and language specific.
Yes.
So they can attend the language neutral, and then it really, the language specific are so small in terms of numbers. It would not be impossible if you had 3 Cree speakers to find instructors and work with that. But I would suspect they're starting at your community interpreting training levels, which are mostly non-academic.
Right. That's a really good point. Again, it gets back to mandates. Like, we have a mandate to provide interpretation for federal government, not for community interpretation. So that's another kind of policy discussion that we should have in Canada. I know
I think we have to stop now. Let's take a 10-minute break. Is it okay with you?